site for raves, rants, and recommendations. Since its launch in 2004, chances are, if it's a business down the street from you, it's got a Yelp page. But the coronavirus pandemic dealt a devastating blow as thousands of businesses across the country were forced to shut down. Yelp laid off 1,000 of its own employees. Now, with a vaccine in sight, but virus uncertainty still ahead, Yelp serves as a sort of mirror to the health of American business. Still, it's not COVID that CEO Jeremy Stoppelman is most worried about. It's the growing shadow of Google. In this edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0, Yelp co-founder and CEO Jeremy Stoppelman.
Take me back to March 2020. The pandemic hits and the lights go out literally at thousands of small businesses across the United States. As the person who runs the most prominent platform for small businesses in the country, what was that moment like for you?
Probably the best word is terror. It was a scary moment, I think, obviously for America, for small businesses, and especially for Yelp, because we're a way to find great local businesses. And, the first thing crossing my mind is, are people going to still buy advertising? Like, are all businesses going to be affected or just a portion? We had gone through, I was CEO in 2008 when we had that major recession. And so I knew that Yelp as a company should be resilient, but I had never faced anything remotely like a pandemic where every business is potentially affected by shutdowns. So it was a very scary moment for me and for the company.
Did reviews come to a standstill? Did advertising stop?
We certainly took a pretty big hit in advertising dollars as people paused their campaigns. Fortunately, we had functionality that allowed them to set a future date. And so we encouraged people to, set a resume date for their advertising months later, perhaps as the pandemic had passed, or at least when the panic would have subsided. Our focus at Yelp was really getting employees ready to work from home, getting people out of offices. This is all, kind of late February. It hit our radar as, hey, this is coming. We need to get, salespeople at home. All of our salespeople have desktop computers in an office. Like, how do we get them equipped to try and work out of their home and keep the company running? And so there was a lot of operational challenges transitioning people to work from home and getting ready to try and adapt to this extreme crisis.
So fast forward to fall, Yelp shares spike 20% on news of the early success of the Pfizer vaccine. And if everything works out, that could mean the economy opens faster. That's good for small businesses. That's good for Yelp. How optimistic are you?
None of us have been through a pandemic before, so we can't know everything. But, I can't say that in the last quarter, things really had come back. Economic activity had picked up. We were seeing people starting to dine at restaurants. Obviously, with the better weather, we weren't quite into winter yet. People were returning to restaurants. Home and local services, as people spent more time at home, really has held up throughout the pandemic. We've really come back in a big way, faster than even we were hoping for. And with the vaccine potentially arriving and starting to get out there, I think we can finally say, hey, there is light at the end of this tunnel. That's been the scariest thing about the whole crisis is we had hoped that a vaccine would arrive, but actually knowing that one is there and that it's actually 90% effective, I think is very exciting. Certainly for us at Yelp, hopefully for lots of in the minds of small business owners, and the rest of the world is very happy, I think, to hear that news.
So what are you expecting to see over the holidays, given that we're going into winter, cold and flu season, a potential spike in COVID cases? We're already seeing hospitalization surge, and we know that people aren't going to be traveling and out there shopping and eating out like they normally would.
I mean, it's hard. I'm not currently contemplating national shutdowns where everyone is frozen in place like they were, kind of the March, April timeframe. I think people will have to be cautious, in restaurant dining will probably be curtailed or very limited depending on the situation in that particular region. But I think, again, for Yelp's business, a lot of it is buoyed by the home and local sector, which has done really well. As people are home, things happen. Your roof leaks, you got to get that fixed. Your toilet clogs, well, your whole family is, your kids are possibly doing their remote schooling there. You got to get that thing fixed. And so those service providers will continue to do well. Will continue to spend to acquire leads from sites like Yelp.
Now, you regularly release these economic impact reports, and from what I can tell, by the end of summer, you found that 160,000 businesses had closed on Yelp. Where does that number stand now? What are businesses telling you about how they're doing region to region?
We have seen, lots of businesses reopen that were temporarily closed. I think the number is around 220,000 of the temporarily closed businesses have opened back up again, which is a great sign. And also from a new business standpoint, especially in the restaurant and food sector, we're seeing new business openings at levels that are in line with 2019. So, that's one really inspiring thing, showing kind of the resilience of American entrepreneurship, is that businesses are, new entrepreneurs are still being born in this environment, which is incredible. I think it just shows incredible tenacity and bodes well for the economy as we start thinking about 2021 and beyond.
Now, early on in the pandemic, Yelp laid off 1,000 people. You furloughed a bit more than that. Where does staffing stand now?
At the start of the pandemic, obviously, we saw advertising revenue dropping very rapidly. We had to make some very tough calls around our people, people that were incredible employees for us, and it was a very difficult moment. We had to lay off 1,000 people, as you mentioned. We also furloughed about 1,000 people as well. And that set us that put us into a stable position to ride out sort of the immediate impact of the pandemic and whatever economic damage would result. And 4 months later, we were actually in a position to be able to bring back extend offers back to almost all of the furloughed employees. And so that was a great feeling. Obviously, it's very tough, to let anybody go. But we had made a commitment to these furloughed employees, and so it was great to see so many of them back working at Yelp, and many of which are here today.
Now, the pandemic, as you alluded to, has become very, very political, and I'm wondering what your take is on Joe Biden's election. Are you at all concerned that his safety-first approach could, mean the economy opens more slowly?
I think we have to be guided by science. We have to take a dispassionate look. We have to take politics out of it and say, we can't really have a great economy if everyone's cowering, from impacts of the pandemic, or hospitals are getting overloaded with cases. So we just have to take a sensible approach. We have to listen to the scientists. If they're telling us that, wearing masks is going to, diminish the impact of the pandemic, then we should all be wearing masks. It's very straightforward. It shouldn't be a political issue. It's very frustrating that it has been. And I think that costs us valuable time, and even more importantly, costs us health and even lives.
It seems like the next stimulus package might be more scaled back. Are you concerned about a divided government, meaning that small businesses aren't going to get the help they need?
I think the Fed chair has been pretty clear that, businesses need support, especially small businesses need support. And I think the initial stimulus package was a positive. And, we've been all waiting and hoping for another one. And I think, we shouldn't just have socialism for big companies where they can borrow endlessly with cheap debt from the, powered by the Fed. We should extend the helping hand to all these great small business owners that are just trying to get by. An assistant of mine, broke into a meeting and tapped me on the shoulder and literally slipped me a Post-it note that said Steve Jobs is on the line.
We could spend a lot of time talking about old stories. You've been in Silicon Valley a long time. You were part of the early PayPal team. But there's one old story that I really do want to ask you about, which is that Google tried to buy Yelp back in 2009 for over $500 million, and you turned them down. Explain how that played out.
Well, I think that Yelp was doing something really positive, which was, growing quickly, gathering all this useful information about local businesses that, frankly, no other site had. And I think Google saw that Maps was of growing importance to them and was interested in Yelp. And we initially had a partnership. But ultimately, I think, Google wasn't satisfied with that partnership and wanted to get into the business themselves. And so then, there was a back and forth where they had some interest in Yelp. But ultimately, it didn't work out. I think we saw things differently. And I think that was good. It allowed Yelp to stay independent and to grow on its own. And frankly, I think I've been able to develop as a CEO quite a bit as well. So I think it's been good for me personally.
Now, as the story goes, Steve Jobs, who was obviously running Apple at the time, Google's biggest competitor, called you to convince you to turn it down. Did that really happen?
It did. Yeah, it was a bit of a surreal moment. I'd call it probably a career highlight, still a peak highlight for me. When an assistant of mine, broke into a meeting and tapped me on the shoulder and literally slipped me a Post-it note that said Steve Jobs is on the line. And so I ran out of the meeting and then, picked up the phone. And of course, it wasn't Steve Jobs. It was Steve Jobs' assistant was on the line. And so then I was waiting for Steve Jobs, who did ultimately get on the phone. And he had some not so nice things to say about Google and some nice things to say about Yelp, and said, he loved Yelp and that we should keep going. And if it was a money thing, then we should be talking to Apple, not Google, but we should just keep doing what we're doing. And, I thought that was good advice.
So fast forward to today, Yelp is now a $2 billion public company, but also Google is now your biggest competitor. Did you make the right call?
Well, I think I did. I think Yelp continues to serve on its mission, which is connecting people with great local businesses. And it's been a really rewarding journey. And I think lots of people find Yelp still incredibly valuable. I think, over 100 million people come to Yelp every single month and steer themselves to a great local business. So I think it's going well.
So the Department of Justice has recently sued Google over antitrust. Taking on Google, competing against Google is no joke for any business. What was your reaction to the suit?
We've been working on this topic for a very long time, so there was a good feeling, I would say, in the Yelp office, because we've been kind of shouting from the rooftops for a very long time that there is a monopoly problem in this country, and in particular there is a Google problem in this country, and Google has behaved illegally and has leveraged its monopoly in ways that are destructive to innovation and competition, and bad. It's bad for consumers, bad for small business owners. And so it was great to see some early validation of that from the DOJ.
Now, we've all seen the increasing number of Google reviews, and Yelp's main complaint that Google favors its own reviews over yours isn't actually the core of the case. Are you at all concerned that your concerns might get passed over?
I mean, it's hard to say where the case goes right now because the state AGs will be, sort of bringing their own cases, and presumably it gets consolidated. So it's hard to know the exact scope of the case. I think, the early signs that, from our perspective are positive. And, again, there's bipartisan support for really scrutinizing Google and taking a look at their behavior over the last decade. You look at television over the last 40, 50 years, it was a highly regulated industry. You look at radio, highly regulated. Even going back to movies, there were antitrust cases that made a big difference in the distribution of films. And so why is it that technology should be completely immune to that, especially these new, sort of the Google generation of technology companies? Why shouldn't, Congress exercise its power? Why shouldn't the DOJ investigate? Why shouldn't the FTC investigate?
You told 60 Minutes back in 2018, if I were starting out today, I would have no shot of building Yelp. That opportunity has been closed off by Google and their approach. If you provide great content in one of these categories that's lucrative to Google and seen as potentially threatening, they will snuff you out. They will make you disappear. They will bury you. Has Google continued to try to bury Yelp since that time?
I mean, it's an easy thing to test for yourself. You could just, do essentially any search with local intent and then see how far down the page you have to go to get to any kind of organic result, especially in, a category that's particularly lucrative from a SMB advertising standpoint. I mean, they've really tried to maximize the revenue, and in doing so have put the consumer in the back seat. And I think that's a real problem. But then also it stifles innovation, because if it's basically there's no organic content anymore, there isn't really that incentive for creators to try and create new and interesting websites, collect information from users. I think it's quite sad. And I think if you talk to the venture capital community, you'll hear that as well. There just isn't as much interest in ideas that are powered by search engine optimization, where you create really wonderful content and then Google or other search engines drive you traffic. Like, it's just Google now, and if it's a lucrative vertical, they're going to try and suck up all the revenue.
Now, President-elect Biden hasn't detailed his thoughts on antitrust yet, but we know that the Obama administration was fairly close to Silicon Valley, and Google in particular. How would you like Biden to weigh in on antitrust? What do you want lawmakers to do? Should Google be broken up?
Yeah, I think all we can ask for is independent thought. And so you're absolutely right that unfortunately the Obama administration has a very bad record when it comes to antitrust enforcement, and especially Google scrutiny. I think Google's lobbyist was the #1 lobbyist in the White House by visits. And so that's been widely reported. And even as the FTC was purportedly investigating, there was seemingly, back-channel communication with Google, which, is very sad to learn of. And so I would hope, and I think there's some indication that Biden is going to take a more independent view of this. And I think we'll have to see, who's involved in the administration, who's in the cabinet, who are the people around Biden. My personal thought is somehow we have to get Elizabeth Warren in there, because she's been particularly strong on, hammering home the point that monopolies are not good for the economy. They're not good for innovation. They're not good for consumers. And so we need someone like that with a really strong message and a strong independence streak as well.
Now, all of that said, some businesses have complained that Yelp reviews skew more negative. How do you respond to, this complaint from businesses who, might prefer Google because they see that they have more positive reviews there?
We try to be, the most independent, create a level playing field for businesses. And, that frustrates businesses that, frankly, on other platforms are used to getting what they want, which is, being able to ask their friends to write reviews for them, being 5 stars. And in fact, the data supports that. So the FTC, an economist there, recently put out a paper that talked about the review distribution on the various platforms. And Yelp actually has the most balanced review system, which is very validating. That feels great to me, because that's what we're trying to achieve, is just a mirror of the real world.
If you are a woman or a person of color in Silicon Valley these days, what's your advice?
These are talented people. They do have a lot of options, so make sure you choose an option that supports you and makes you feel valued.
We explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
China continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong, but it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
They don't want to sit around with their cash, money market fund, bank deposits, all earning zero. They don't want treasuries at less than 1 or high-grade bonds at 2. And so they've had to push out into risk assets.
You're an engineer, you worked at X.com, back in the day, the online bank that was started by Elon Musk, which merged with PayPal. What are some of the biggest lessons you've taken from that time in your life and those people who I imagine are still in your life today?
One of the big takeaways from PayPal was just how much you could do even if you had no experience. And so I joined X.com, which eventually merged with PayPal when I was 22, I think. And very quickly, I became an engineering manager, maybe a year and a half later, 2 years later, and then ultimately rose into the executive ranks there on the engineering side. And thinking about it, it was kind of preposterous that those folks would give me so much responsibility so early in my career. But the fact that we somehow pulled it off and created a successful consumer brand and payment site that ended up being really critical to eBay, and then ultimately now as a payment service that so many of us use, I think validates that it's not all about experience. A lot of it is great determination, creativity, innovation, all of those good things. And so I've tried to bring that with me to Yelp, frankly. And we try to make sure that people have fantastic careers. We have a lot of growth from within when it comes to promotions. And we have a lot of homegrown, now senior employees. And so it's really validating to see people step up and take on more responsibility over time.
Where do you fall on the importance of culture? Because it seems like there's a group of CEOs in Silicon Valley who seem to think it's important and others who seem to think it's all about growth.
Well, I think you want both. I think it's hard to be a company and not have robust growth. It just fundamentally is difficult, especially in the technology industry where things change so fast. So if you're not growing, then you're probably not keeping up, and then eventually you fall over. But I think we also see that culture is important, especially in recruiting the top talent that you need to succeed here in Silicon Valley. Is you need to have a great culture. You need to be on top of things, what's going on in your organization. Because if you don't, somebody else will be good at that, and then people will flock to that company that is also high growth. There's always other shiny new objects out there, and so you want to deliver, I think, on both dimensions as a CEO. There's been some reporting in Business Insider that Yelp has an aggressive sales culture. What's been your response to that? I mean, we're one of the most highly scrutinized sales teams, I think, in the history of local sales teams. I mean, for many, many years, business owners, for instance, would accuse us of extortion because they claimed that you could take down Yelp reviews if you paid us. That was never true. And so any individual anecdotal accusation, I think you have to take with a grain of salt. We do have thousands of salespeople, and so is every conversation going to be perfect? Absolutely not. But, we have systems in place to ensure that the conversations are the ones that we expect, are empathetic, are thoughtful, and the vast, vast majority of those conversations are great. Now, I've interviewed many folks in the PayPal mafia over the years, and they all seem to agree that, very smart, but also very lucky to have each other. If you are a woman or a person of color in Silicon Valley these days, what's your advice? How do you break through if you don't have that kind of a network? I mean, I think Silicon Valley has gotten better on this dimension. I think there's a growing awareness of the need to create opportunities for people of color, for women. And so I would make sure that you're aligned with a company that does care about these things. I think Yelp is a company that does care about these things, that cares a great deal about diversity. And a lot of these companies are now publishing, annually their numbers on how are things improving. Are they making progress? Do they have something to show? And I think Yelp has consistently made progress on that dimension, and it's all public. It's published annually in our reports. And so that's probably my best advice is these are talented people. They do have a lot of options, so make sure you choose an option that supports you and makes you feel valued. Because there's so many great companies in Silicon Valley. Like, don't waste your time on someone that doesn't value you.
When you look ahead, let's say 5 years from now, and the pandemic is hopefully in the rearview mirror, what is going to be the biggest source of growth?
Well, I think we have a lot of opportunity to better monetize Yelp. We talked about how only about 20% of our leads are monetized right now, and so we'd love to see that percentage drift up because there's just so much incredible value flowing through Yelp, accruing to business owners, and we want to give a boost to the people that are paying us. We want to help our advertisers get more leads, and so that's a big focus for the company. And also, we just want to build out our presence in home and local in some of these areas that people may not be as aware of. Like, I think across the country, everyone knows Yelp as a restaurant site, but how do we shift that perception and really, drive home the message that Yelp is for anything that you need locally, any service provider, any local business, you should be turning to Yelp because it has, as we talked about, the most balanced rating system, the most useful and trustworthy information. And so skip that whole Google box and just come to the Yelp app.
That's a great place to end it. Jeremy Stoppelman, thank you so much for joining us today on Studio 1.0. It's been great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Some things you see coming, some things you don't. The trick is to be ready for anything. Pablo from Infrastructure Support is working every day to keep essential market data flowing seamlessly. We keep on, so you can keep on.
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
It's part documentary, part drama, all daunting.
We built these things and we have a responsibility to change it.
Netflix's hit film, The Social Dilemma, has soared to the top of most watch lists in multiple countries, waking the wider world up to the alleged perils of technology. The indictment is unforgiving that social media is a drug, creating an epidemic of addiction and manipulation, and generations more anxious, depressed, and unhealthy than ever before. The film profiles multiple Silicon Valley veterans, including Tristan Harris, former design ethicist at Google, now co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology; Tim Kendall, former head of monetization at Facebook and former president of Pinterest, now CEO of Moment. They join me for a virtual conversation on this edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0, along with Sophia Noble, an associate professor at UCLA and author of a best-selling book on bias in technology, to talk about what the movie got right, wrong, and chart a path toward the social solution.
Each of you has been a voice in the conversation around big tech's unchecked power. And I'm curious, when was the light bulb moment for you? What was the moment that sparked your desire to speak out?
I think the moment for me was when I was at Google, and it was about 2012. Having studied at this lab at Stanford called the Persuasive Technology Lab, I saw that more and more of my friends' decisions were about building engagement and growth and less about a genuine, sincere intent for how do we build technology that empowers people and does good in society. And that was really the light bulb moment for me.
Now, Tim, you were focused on how Facebook makes money for 5 years, and then 5 more years at Pinterest. That's a decade. When did things shift for you?
I think they really shifted when I had my first child, and I realized, I think, as I was trying to manage, a job at Pinterest, trying to be a dad, and then my phone, I realized that I just lost control over my phone, and realized that it was controlling me. Maybe what we were up to in terms of extracting attention, as Tristan will say, might not have a very happy ending on a lot of different dimensions, including our own mental well-being, but also the impact that ultimately it could have on society.
Tim, you recently testified before Congress and said that you believe social media is driving us to the brink of civil war, which is quite dramatic. What do you mean by that?
Well, I just think that the services are polarizing us, really on almost every dimension. They're polarizing us politically. They're polarizing us in terms of how we view health issues like COVID. They're polarizing us racially. I mean, in a sense, I think it's fair to say that all of these issues around polarization existed to some degree before social media. But I think we can all agree that polarization has accelerated. In fact, I'd say the acceleration is accelerating, which is really scary. It seems to get worse every year and every month. We seem to be more and more divided. And I think the violence and division that we're seeing, I believe these are precursor events to broader civil unrest that could ultimately lead to civil war.
I mean, that's a huge statement. I mean, Sophia, would you agree?
What we're talking about are histories of violence and oppression in our country that social media exacerbates and weaponizes against the most vulnerable, against people who have historically been in the crosshairs of violence in this country. It's really about the society and the people, and then what the technology is contributing to or not.
Now, there's a tragic irony in that most of the people tasked with talking about the problem, the social dilemma, in the film are white men. Tristan and Tim are 2 of them. And white men are overrepresented at the companies that are building these products and creating part of the problem. As a woman of color, what would you have added?
Well, I would have backed up probably 20 years in the research, because again, I think that women in particular and people of color have been doing the research in this area for a long time. It's a little bit disheartening for some of us to see the makers of the problems in terms of people really actually working on product development all of a sudden see the light when it starts to affect their own communities or their own experiences or maybe their own moral barometer, and then kind of really narrow the conversation. I think there's an opportunity with this film to, in fact, open up the landscape for 50 more films and books and graphic novels and television shows for many, many more voices. And I think that's really the opportunity with a film like this. It's, you know, it's kind of cracked open the can, but there's a lot more to pour out.
How much of this is technology and how much of this is just human nature, that technology and that these social platforms simply amplify?
There's a point in the film where Tristan talks about how it's not so much the technologies per se, it's that the technologies really bring out the worst in people and amplify the worst tendencies in people. Racism is endemic, and it's been around for thousands of years, but you know, we've really started to see hate and violence around these issues just explode by virtue of these tools that bring out sort of the worst tendencies, or at least bring out tendencies that are there but are now being brought out into the light in a way that's really corrosive.
Now, we do have a statement from Facebook on the film. Facebook saying, we should have conversations about the impact of social media on our lives, but the social dilemma buries the substance in sensationalism. Rather than offer a nuanced look at technology, it gives a distorted view of how social media platforms work to create a convenient scapegoat for what are difficult and complex societal problems. Tristan, what's your reaction to that?
We would expect Facebook to respond in this way. I think the claim that Facebook would make in that statement is, we're holding up a mirror to your society. If you don't like what you see in the mirror, we're really sorry to tell you that was already there. But the mirror they're holding up is a funhouse mirror that warps society because it amplifies certain characteristics and makes some way more visible than others, specifically conflict, outrage, moral righteousness, etc., because those things get more clicks. And it's this race to the bottom of the brainstem, this race to the lizard brain, whether it is racism, inequality, poverty, or climate change. If we're all walking around as outraged, narcissistic, and addicted people with low mental health and feeling overwhelmed, that's not a society that can heal itself. It amplifies whatever gets the most attention, which is just like driving down the 101. And if we sort by what gets the most attention, if I look at a car crash, Facebook and Google say, oh, you must love car crashes. And they give you more and more and more car crashes. And that's kind of why our society looks like it's sort of gone crazy, because that's not become just a virtual reality. We started making choices on that reality. And even if you don't use these platforms, you still live in a country that is living in that virtual reality and voting based on those decisions, and then making and bringing guns to street corners based on those decisions. So I think we have to really look at the entire consequences here.
If we stay on the current path where there's no oversight, no regulation, no law, we can be guaranteed that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
I want people to know is that everything they're doing online is being watched, is being tracked. Every single action you take is carefully monitored and recorded.
A lot of people think Google's just a search box and Facebook's just a place to see what my friends are doing. What they don't realize is there's entire teams of engineers whose job is to use your psychology against you.
I was the co-inventor of the Facebook like button.
I was the president of Pinterest,
Google, Twitter, Instagram.
There were meaningful changes happening around the world because of these platforms. I think we were naive about the flip side of that coin.
A number of guests in the film are asked, is there one bad guy? And they all say, no, 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 there's not just one bad guy. And at this point, let's take Mark Zuckerberg, for example. He can see the consequences of what he's built, but he is still building it. Does that mean he's a bad guy?
I think it means he's negligent. His understanding is absolutely not keeping up with the impact that his technology is having on the world. And I think the best illustration of this is the election happens in 2016. Facebook, in a number of ways through bad actors and algorithmic bias, tipped the election. A month later, he's asked, what do you think about that? He thinks it's preposterous. And 2 years later, he acknowledges the impact, acknowledges that Facebook likely did tip the election, and then apologizes in front of Congress. But that's 2 years later.
Tristan, what do you think about Mark, about the Google founders who've recently left the company? Are they bad guys?
I think I agree with Tim that there's a lot of negligence. Each company is different and the personalities that are involved are different. I think that even if they were as enlightened as they possibly could be, when they speak, they sound like hostages trapped in a hostage video, where nothing that a hostage is saying makes any sense until you see the person off stage holding a gun to their head, which is their business model. I would say Jack Dorsey appears to be trying to do the best that he can, but in a very, very complex and unfortunate circumstance. And so that's why we actually need a global cultural movement to address these problems, because the state has to bind the market. This film is exciting to me because it's the first time that we have 190 countries and 30 languages, I think, all becoming awake to these problems at a massive scale.
Now, Sophia, here in Silicon Valley, we often glorify the founders of these companies. As a Silicon Valley outsider, how do you think we can hold them accountable?
I think that we've got to have big time structural intervention. It's going to require regulation. It's going to require repatriation of the trillions of dollars they've made off of making these problems and putting them back into the systems that can actually take care of our society. We can't be so dependent upon this sector or its leaders.
Tim, I'm sure you're still friends with a lot of people who work at these companies. How have
less and less, it seems like.
But how have your former colleagues reacted?
I don't think fundamentally anyone is a bad person who works there. I do believe they're negligent. I think they fundamentally believe that their platforms are doing net good in the world. And so they look for the data that reinforces that.
Now, you have had your critics. Brooke Hammerling, a tech communications veteran, said of a number of the folks interviewed in the film, most of them made a great deal of money from the companies they're now criticizing. I mean, they made plane money, guys. She means enough money to buy a plane. And while when you have a G5 at your disposal, it's really easy to sit there and criticize. I asked then, why not give a bulk of your wealth away to fight this, to undo the damage you yourselves helped create? Tim, I'm sure you made some money in that decade. How do you reconcile that?
I think it's really fair criticism. I hadn't read Brooke's exact statement. I've put $10 million plus into this issue, and we've given away millions of dollars to nonprofit organizations that are helping around these issues. And our intention is to keep giving away a lot of money, and a big chunk of the money that we made from these platforms. So look, I think it's really fair criticism.
Let's say Mark Zuckerberg wakes up tomorrow and says, I'm done. Shuts down Facebook, no more Facebook. What happens? Is the world better or worse off?
I think it would be perfectly fine for Facebook to shut down. I'm on the real Facebook oversight board. You know, I think we're really interested in seeing some important interventions happen quickly before democracy continues to collapse as we pummel towards the next presidential election in the United States. But, you know, I think it's more complex than just saying Facebook should shut down, although I think there are many, many people who would agree it probably should. But if we stay on the current path where there's no oversight, no regulation, no law, no responsibility, we can be guaranteed that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
So what should the laws be? What should the government do? If these companies aren't going to change on their own, then should they be broken up? Should there be new laws?
I look at the amount of regulatory reform that we need here as being on parallel with the financial crisis, in the sense that in the financial crisis, where you had thinner and thinner slices of sort of junk bonds being sold as if they were, you know, high quality bonds, leading to a full-scale house of cards collapse, I think we've been selling thinner and thinner slices of junk attention assets, fake attention, sold for fake clicks to fake users with fake reporting to advertisers. And we have an entire sort of democratic collapse sitting on top of the fact that this has been a predatory economy that has based on high risk activity, recommending random things to users you don't know and you don't speak the language to, leading to a genocide. So I think if you think about the scope of reform, we're not just saying let's pass this law or that law. We're saying, how do you get something more like Dodd-Frank, comprehensive, humane technology reform? How do you have, comprehensive reform that enables competition, has more transparency, accountability for harms, tax justice, as Sophia was talking about, repatriating some of the money back into institutions that have fallen apart, and have that all add up to a system of technology that reports to the people as opposed to reporting to the board of directors, and have them work in the service of people. This has so entangled itself into our social fabric and into our social status pipelines and into the development of children that even if you opt out, that's not enough.
Sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
True to its name, the movie talks a lot about the social dilemma, but not a lot about the social solutions. As the credits start to roll, Tristan, you're allowed to offer one suggestion about turning off notifications, but really, in the short term, like while we wait for these big changes that could take years to happen, what do we do? Do we delete? Do we get rid of our phones? Like, how do we navigate the day-to-day?
Even if you decide not to use these platforms and you delete your accounts, people who are not on these platforms can still experience life or death consequences because other people who live in their country do. The Muslim minority group, the Rohingya in Myanmar, who were murdered, didn't have to be on Facebook to experience the consequences and persecuted because of fake news that was spread about them on Facebook. The mob lynchings in India that were spreading fake news about a particular minority group that led to lynchings, they didn't have to be on Facebook to experience that. And when you think about teenagers who say, hey, I would like to opt out of being on Instagram, and I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to be on TikTok anymore. They still go to a school where all their kids and all the kids are ranking each other by who's popular based on how successful they are on TikTok. So the point is that this has so entangled itself into our social fabric and into our social status pipelines and into the development of children that even if you opt out, that's not enough. One thing that can change at a fast enough clock rate is culture, meaning a common cultural doctrine for a humane way to live in an inhumane technology infrastructure. And I think that's kind of something we have to co-create together, is a nonviolent communication protocol or a humane protocol for living on inhumane platforms. There's many, many more recommendations on humanetech.com.
I think there's a lot of ways that we need to intervene. I will tell you, though, that, putting it back on the public and saying, it's your fault you didn't take the phone out of your kid's hand, or you parent are wrong because you had too much screen time going with your kid, I think is really the most powerfully disingenuous kind of framing there is. It's like, if you don't have any healthy food in your community and you don't have any grocery stores and all there is fast food, and then you say, shame on you for feeding your kid McDonald's or corporate industry food, it's just not fair. It only took a small handful of people to really convince Congress and state legislatures and local municipalities that smoking was terrible. My students can't even remember. They weren't alive at the time, but some of us on this call maybe were. I'm sure that my mom probably smoked a pack of cigarettes after she gave birth to me. It's probable that the doctors and the nurses were smoking in the hospital in the 70s when I was born. And so we have to ask the question, how did we go from that to what we have now, which is a total paradigm shift? And so I agree, we need cultural shift, but that was just strategic public policy that said, even if you're not a smoker, there's still tertiary negative effects that happen from secondhand smoke or from these systems that neglect the broader public concerns. That's the kind of model we need to think about and I think look at as we're looking at the larger tech sector. And I think there's a lot of promise and opportunity to make change.
You've got the House and the Senate scrutinizing big tech right now. Should these companies be broken up?
Yeah, I think there's a monopoly conversation that needs to happen. I also think that there is an interesting page to be taken out of sort of auto manufacturers. And what I mean by that is that auto manufacturers were addicted to the fossil fuel industry. And they were incentivized to move to electric because it was better for the world and it was better for people. And so I do wonder if there is a possibility and a path that could be co-created between these tech companies and governments all over the world, where incentives could be put in place to segue off of an attention-based business model, i.e. fossil fuels, in hopes of finding what is the electric and solar and green model, and how do we work together to get there.
If technology is advancing exponentially, only going to get better at manipulating us, can we actually intervene?
I'm sorry, I don't think the companies will change from within. I think that when you have a product that creates so much consumer and public harm, it's actually unsafe products. Until those are regulated and contained as unsafe, they will continue. Why wouldn't they? I mean, again, we're talking about billionaires adding billions to their coffers right now. So there's no incentive for them to stop the model. And they're also, quite frankly, so insulated, with their wealth from ever even being affected by the harms. So they don't even let their own children engage with the technologies that they make. So we know that the makers are not going to be the source of the intervention. It's going to require an informed public, electorates, policymakers, regulators around the world. It's going to take those kinds of actions and, of course, the culture shift that we need in order to see the changes that we want.
Tim, if you could say something to Mark Zuckerberg right now, one thing he could do, what would it be?
It's change your business model. To start having the conversation at Facebook about how the business model is corrosive and what could be the path to segue off of an attention-based business model to something else that is aligned with the public good.
Like a subscription model?
Possibly a subscription model with governments all over the world subsidizing in the same way that they subsidize fossil fuel, shifting to, more green technologies. I think that may be our only path out of this.
Where are we in 5 to 10 years? Do you believe we'll be better off or worse off?
I don't know if we're going to make it another year, frankly, if we don't change these things immediately. I am deeply concerned, and I think that this thing has eroded faster than any of us have ever anticipated. I think, as Tim says in the film, the changes that we've seen and the developments we've seen in the last few years, I didn't think we'd get to a world where fringe conspiracy theories would make up a third to half of major political parties. We're now 10 years into this mass hypnosis, this mass warping effect on the collective psyche. So even if we kind of vote in this election, we have to realize that the basis for that vote, the basis for how we're all thinking, believing, and seeing reality has been warped for many decades now because of these forces in the business model.
I think we're better off. I'm ultimately optimistic, given some of the things that we all talked about. I believe in 5 to 10 years, much like what happened with tobacco, much like what happened with seatbelts, which, by the way, were incredibly controversial, and automakers didn't want to put them in. And now we have seatbelts in every car. It's not controversial. I hopefully will get on the other side of this in the same way we did with those historic issues.
I think of abolitionists in my own community. I think of women struggling for the right to vote. I think of so many different movements that have changed paradigms. And again, it doesn't take millions of people to do that, but it does take enough people of conscience, of determination, of love, and of care to organize and stay persistent and relentless. And I think we've been there, and we're going to continue to be there in this domain too.
All right. Well, with that, we will leave it there. Tristan Harris, Sophia Noble, Tim Kendall, thank you so much for joining us.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
I don't really see it impacting the need for monetary policy to be there to support the recovery, because I don't think we're going to be necessarily back to our goals in short set. I think this is a real journey, not a sprint.
In her early 20s, Whitney Wolfe Herd became tech famous as a co-founder of Tinder, where users swipe right if they like what they see and left if they don't. But she left in a controversy, suing her Tinder colleagues for sexual harassment and discrimination. That case settled out of the public eye, but Herd's mission to upend dating norms through technology was just getting started. She threw her efforts into Bumble, a dating app where women make the first move. It now has 100 million users in 150 countries, and Wall Street is abuzz with chatter on Bumble's road to IPO. Joining me now on Bloomberg Studio 1.0, Bumble CEO and co-founder, Whitney Wolfe Herd.
Whitney, the pandemic has upended everything about normal life, and one might assume that the dating world came to a standstill at the start of this. What happened if you were single and looking for love in the time of coronavirus, or maybe just some fun?
So this pandemic has completely changed everything about our lives. But what has been reinforced is the importance of relationships and the importance of human connection. Loneliness has also been at an all-time high, given the way our lives have been completely changed. And the importance of having relationships and finding companionship and even finding love has only become more and more critical in this time. And so, you know, like any business owner and any business team across the world, the first few weeks were very touch and go. We didn't know what was going to happen because of this pandemic. We didn't know if this was going to be catastrophic for business or if there could be some silver lining. And we're very, very fortunate that it's the latter. So what we've seen is the durability of the need to date and the durability of digital dating.
What activity did you see on the platform, given that people couldn't see each other in person? Did it just stop or did it spike?
It spiked. The activity on our product, starting at the lockdowns, really started to go up. And what was fascinating was more than activity rising was the use of our video dating. And so it's important to note that we introduced video chats and video messaging and video dating well before this pandemic really started. We introduced this in 2019, and the usage of it was not very vast. It was actually quite measured. And all of a sudden, with this pandemic hitting, the video chats went through the roof. And not only did they go through the roof from a use case standpoint, but from a time spent video chatting. And something really amazing happened out of this. We really started to realize that people are getting to know each other on a deeper level. They're getting to know each other more authentically, more thoroughly. And then they're able to evaluate, coming off of these video chats, if the person on the other end is in fact someone they want to meet. And so categorically, this has changed how digital dating works for the long run.
What makes Bumble unique is that you let women make the first move only with men that they are matched with, or if we're talking about same-sex folks, either person can make the first move.
For so long, dating has always told men to go first, has always told women to wait. And by doing this, we've completely created an imbalance in gender equity when it comes to relationships. And so if we're talking about a heterosexual relationship and you're telling women never to make the first move and to sit and to wait, and you're asking men to always go first, you're creating this situation where men are led to be rejected. When they're rejected and hiding behind a profile screen, a lot of bad things can happen, like aggression, harassment, abuse, and other forms of toxic behavior. And so it really creates this imbalance. But what Bumble has done is entirely flip the switch. So on Bumble, every time a woman connects with a man, if she's looking for a man on the product or a male on the product, she always has to start the conversation. She always must start and must always say hello first. And this has completely turned it on its head in the sense that rejection is eliminated, pressure has been taken away, empowerment has been infused, and control has been given to the woman. And so this really does change the entire dynamic start to end.
You also do a ton of user research. What are you hearing from users about what they want more of, what they want less of, and how do you meet those demands?
customers over the years have shown us that they want more than love. They want more than romance. They actually started hacking our product to find friends, to find business connections, to find platonic connection. And so then we built these modes for them. And so now Bumble is a full-fledged social connection platform for people you don't know yet, ranging well beyond love. It's, extends into platonic friendships, business relationships, and so much more.
You now have more than 100 million users in 150 different countries around the world. Talk to us about the growth you're seeing in places like India and Germany and Mexico.
I think what growth around the world tells us is that we're all not so different after all, right? Yes, we have different cultures, we have different preferences, but at the end of the day, we are all humans and we all need to connect. We all need to find love, we need to find friendship, we need to find business opportunities. We're seeing huge growth in places like Mexico, Germany, even in Israel, we're seeing early high growth. And so when we plant our seeds places, due to the nature of our product, which is infused with empowerment and giving control to women, and really the wider use case of just, finding connection, this works around the world.
So how does women making the first move play out in a place like India, where, even more so than in the United States, women are not empowered to break down cultural barriers like that?
It's really, truly been one of the greatest joys of my career to go into places that are historically not engineered to grant women power or to give them, any encouragement to go after what they want in their relationships, and to go in with a product, which is ours, Bumble, and to actually give them a different way. So it's not that women around the world don't want to make the first move. It's not that women in India don't want to be treated as equals or given control over the relationships. It's that the society and the system hasn't granted that opportunity. And so when you introduce another way, women will thrive.
Now, in terms of the product, I know there have been some new features like letting women send an introductory emoji, so you can sort of put feelers out there. Because you can't meet someone in person, you can't, monitor things like body language and get signals from that. Talk to us about some of the new features that you've implemented at this unprecedented time.
We've done quite a few things. We have given daters the opportunity to put badges on their profile, which indicates what they're willing to do during this time, if they want a socially distanced date, or if they are COVID-free and are willing to go on an actual date, or if they are just interested in virtual dating at this time.
There's so much talk about what new normal will look like when we come out of this, if we come out of this, as we come out of this. Some of us may never go back to the office, for example. Do you think things about dating will also be permanently changed?
I do. I believe that there are a couple things that will change for the better with dating. One, I believe that we will stop taking relationships for granted. I really do believe that we as people recognize, maybe long overdue, but we fully recognize the importance of companionship and healthy, equitable relationships. Secondarily, I think that on Bumble, we are going to see the lasting impacts in a long-term kind of feature to stay will be video dating. I really do believe, coming off the data we've seen and the anecdotal feedback we've heard, that women truly feel safer and more encouraged and more willing to meet someone in real life if they've gotten to know them virtually. So instead of just matching with someone, connecting with them, chatting with them, and then going to the coffee shop, which is what was taking place pre-COVID, I do believe there's going to be added layers of friction before you meet in real life, which candidly is exceptional for the sake of safety and making sure that connections are valid and really authentic and true.
You sued your former team at Tinder for discrimination and sexual harassment.
That became very public. My departure and the details of my departure were displayed all over the internet. And with that came a slew of online abuse and harassment from complete strangers.
continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong, but it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
This is the 1980s all over again, to make sure that we keep our hands firmly on the driving wheel.
I do not see demand coming back to the pre-COVID level anywhere earlier than the end of 2022.
If that happens and we see a demand recovery, then I think the market can absorb it.
I want to learn a little bit more about young Whitney because there are so many little girls out there who need to be inspired by stories like yours. When you were a kid, did you think you could be an entrepreneur or a founder or a CEO? What kind of kid were you?
When I was young, I didn't have a lot of woman CEOs or woman founder examples to look to. I think a lot of us experienced that growing up. And so it was never something in my mind. So I never thought that I would be a businesswoman per se, but I always had a creative streak in me and I always had an entrepreneurial streak in me. But, I don't think we knew that we had permission to go there so far to the point where it was almost mocked to some degree. And so, I think the beauty of where we are today is that's changing. Women that are starting their careers and starting businesses are sources of inspiration to young girls.
You went to Southern Methodist University. As I understand it, you started your first business in college, actually selling tote bags with the proceeds going to the areas hardest hit by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And when you graduated, you worked in orphanages across Asia. Your resume reads more like a resume for a saint than a CEO.
Well, certainly not a saint, I can tell you that much. But what is interesting about that is, had I not had those experiences, Bumble would not be what Bumble is today. And I think what we're trying to accomplish at Bumble is that you can drive profit and purpose, and they can coincide, they can coexist. And in fact, they fuel one another. And I think what's really interesting is if you look at every major social media platform prior to Bumble, not one of them had been engineered truly with women in mind, whether that was being able to send a photo that might disappear or being able to, decide who was attractive on campus or not. I don't want to name names, but I think you can understand where I'm going with this in the sense that there had really never been a major social media platform or connection platform that designed for a woman's experience. And so when I was starting Bumble, it was so important to me to really rewrite the code for the woman experience start to end. How do we protect her? How do we keep her safe? How do we empower her? How do we inspire her? How do we give her what she wants and needs?
So before Bumble was Tinder, where you were a co-founder, and they were trying to rewrite the code, but in a different direction. And swiping left and right is still a completely different approach. What did you learn there and from that experience?
So my time of being a co-founder at Tinder was incredibly informative, and I'm forever grateful for the experience and exposure I had to a high growth tech business early on. And from my time there, I really identified white space. I can't tell you how hard the first few years of Bumble were. I mean, I was mocked and laughed at and told I was crazy and that it would never work. And we were told that, women won't make the first move. They shouldn't make the first move. They don't make the first move. And here we are, 1.5 billion first moves and counting 5.5, 6 years later. And it's really, it's a testament to all women out there. If you identify an issue that women experience and you set out to solve that for women, they will come and they will follow because we need the solutions. And And it's a huge opportunity for all women building businesses.
You've been quite candid about your own experience being bullied. You also, in a big first move, sued your former team at Tinder for discrimination and sexual harassment. How did that inform how you want to lead and how you want to do things differently at Bumble?
After my departure from Tinder, that became very public. My departure and the details of my departure were displayed all over the internet. And with that came a slew of online abuse and harassment from complete strangers. But it never ended. It would go in the night and the daytime, and my social media accounts were flooded with really toxic and mean words. And, words count, and it hurt me. It devastated me, and it sent me into a really dark place. And from that, I had an opportunity to say, okay, this can either destroy me, and this is the end of my career, or I can really put a pin in what's wrong here and try to build a solution. And so that was really the beginning of my journey onward into my next chapter, which has become Bumble, which was, why is social media so unaccountable? Why is social media so cruel? Why are we allowed to treat each other this way online when, frankly, those same people sending those messages, if they saw me in a grocery store or on the street, I can guess that they wouldn't say those things to me because there would be some level of accountability. And so that was really the beginning of flipping the switch. And my lesson through that has been to really make that our North Star. How do we engineer healthy and equitable relationships for everyone? And that starts with also how we treat each other internally as a team. And so it's just been very foundational and something we've stayed very, very loyal to.
If someone says something about you online or comments on the way you look, that can have a big impact on someone. What about the role of online dating in that? Because that can also play a pretty powerful role. What are you doing to address the negative or potential negative mental and emotional impacts of that?
You're absolutely right. It's first and foremost, we've really laid down the law internally and from a product standpoint on what we will tolerate and what we will not. We have a zero tolerance policy for hate, for bad behavior, for toxicity, for any discrimination of any kind. We will block you, we will report you, and we will involve the police if it is consequential, if you do something that is dangerous. Not only that, but we've really built product features to support this. So we were the first group to roll out photo verification. Photo verification is an opportunity to validate and verify who you are in under 1 minute. The fact that online dating is a place where you can be anonymous or you can pretend to be someone else is very scary. And so we really take this very seriously, and we make sure that that's not happening and that we're doing all we can to prevent it.
You've contributed to a Texas law actually cracking down on digital sexual harassment. Tell me how much progress you've made there.
We introduced a bill to solve for the issue of no online accountability and no regulation on really toxic, scary digital behavior. So in the real world, you have indecent exposure. This is a law. There are consequences if you expose yourself in public in front of others in any unsolicited format. It's a very serious law, and there are very serious consequences. Yet, you could stand on the same block in front of the same strangers and you could airdrop a photo of yourself and there are no consequences, not until the law that we had passed. And we introduced this bill to ban or to make illegal the sending of unsolicited lewd photos. This bill was introduced as a law. The law passed unanimously in the Texas State Senate, which we all know in such a polarizing political climate, it's very hard to do. So that's just to suggest the serious nature of this. This is a human issue. This is not a political issue. And we were able to get that law actually signed into effect. And so now in the state of Texas, it is illegal to send unsolicited lewd photos. And that is just the first of many laws and bills that we hope to advocate for in the coming years.
So speaking of politics, we've been through an incredibly volatile political time. How are you addressing politics and dating?
We stay really loyal to our mission. And if our mission is to engineer a world or to create a world where all relationships are healthy and equitable, well, then there are certain things we cannot tolerate. There are certain things we have to stand up for. We must protect a woman's right to choose. We must protect a woman's right to her own body and her choices. And we must protect the right to love whoever you want to love, no matter what. And we must really take a hard stance against any form of discrimination. And so that is the firm line we draw in the sand. We do not tell you who you can and cannot vote for, but we do tell you what we will and will not tolerate as a business. And so that's really been our Northern Star.
There's been talk about an IPO. Does Blackstone's involvement now change the path forward?
We are working hand in hand every day, Blackstone and Bumble, to pursue the best future outcome for the business.
We explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy. What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here?
It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
I am David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
As of last year, the private equity firm Blackstone now has a majority stake in Bumble. What kind of resources and access has that afforded you to take advantage and scale?
Our partnership with Blackstone is absolutely incredible. I have so much respect and admiration for the team there, for their leadership, for their incredible support and championing of us, both as a team and as a business. It has really been the highlight of my entire career to work with Blackstone. It has been a remarkable success story. From a private equity and high growth tech business standpoint, and there's not so many of those. So it was a bit of a unique match, but it has been absolutely sensational. And they have really given us a wide range of resources and support, ranging from helping us scale our talent to placing our board, to helping us dig deeper into data analytics and really doubling down on privacy and security, and coming in and really helping us just really further accelerate the business from every side. And I have a great partnership with the folks over there, and it has really been a remarkable opportunity.
There's been talk about an IPO, a $6 to $8 billion IPO. Does Blackstone's involvement now change the path forward?
So I cannot comment on the future prospect of a potential IPO, but I can tell you that we are working hand in hand every day, Blackstone and Bumble, to pursue the best future outcome for the business. And we love our partnership, and we stay very close on all future potential opportunities. We're a high growth business, and so we're exploring all options.
Now, Tinder, along with all the other dating apps, is now your competition. So why should people use Bumble when there are now, pick your flavor, Coffee Meets Bagel, Hinge, The League, all of these other options out there?
We fundamentally believe that the way a relationship starts is very suggestive of how it will end. And we're really trying to recalibrate the way relationships begin so they can become more healthy, more equitable, more long-lasting. And when a woman makes the first move, she really establishes control and has an equal footing from the very first hello. And that's what we really fundamentally believe sets us apart from a product standpoint. Even if you saw the same person on 5 products, on Bumble, saying hello first changes the course of the way that relationship will go and the way that conversation will go. And it really does just promote more healthy and equitable relationships for all.
Any dating app has the problem that once you create a successful match, those people don't need the app anymore, certainly don't need to pay a subscription. How do you reconcile that and keep making money?
That is an issue for certain dating apps, but we are not just a dating app. We offer so many other verticals inside our product, and we see that our users and our customers really come for more than just dating. We have a large sector of our user base that comes and uses all 3 modes, which is dating, friend finding, and business opportunities.
Does that mean then you're competing with Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and Snapchat? And how do you compete?
What's really interesting about the Instagrams and the Facebooks and the Snapchats of the world, you're communicating with your friends. That is a place you are keeping in touch with the network you already have. You are commenting on friends' photos and exchanging updates with one another. Bumble connects you to people you don't know yet. So Bumble is really what comes before social media. This is what is giving you a network. This is what is expanding your opportunities of who you know. This is introducing you to new people. And then down the road, you can engage with those folks on other social media platforms. So Facebook is to people you know, Bumble is to people you don't.
All right. Whitney Wolfhard, founder and CEO of Bumble. Thank you so much, Whitney, for taking the time to join us. Great to have you here.
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
My goal is to have vaccines available for people throughout the developing world based on what their countries decide. We've got financing available, but the countries need to choose systems and then begin buying or receiving vaccines.
She joined IBM as a systems engineer in Detroit in 1981 and stayed on for 4 decades. Ginny Rometty rose through the ranks in technical, sales, and then management jobs. In 2012, she became IBM's CEO, president, and chair, the first woman to hold the job in history. After steering the company through major technological transformations and ups and downs, from the rise of mobile to AI and the cloud, Ginny Rometty bids a fond farewell to one of the great loves of her life. This is her exit interview. Joining me on this edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0, former IBM CEO and chair, Ginny Rometty.
You are leaving IBM after an 8-year tenure as CEO and nearly 40 years at the company. How does that feel?
It's almost surreal in some ways. Obviously, it's a company I loved, or I wouldn't have stayed here for 40 years. So it feels like it's a great moment because we've just really been through quite a transformation. So on one way, or on one hand, it's bittersweet. On another hand, I leave with really great confidence for the company.
What are you most nostalgic about, and what are you most excited about?
Well, I'm certainly most nostalgic about the people and the platform of the company. I mean, I really do believe IBM stands for the gold standard of good tech. And what we do, most systems of the world wouldn't run without us. So it's the people that do that work I'll be most nostalgic about, and the clients who have been decades of relationships. But as well, what I'm going to look forward to, because I think it's been one of the great things I've had a chance to work on, is a lot about making an inclusive workforce. So one of the things I'm going to do in my retirement is to lead up with Ken Frazier from Merck an initiative called 110 to place 1 million Black employees over the next 10 years into our companies.
With 110, this organization of 3 dozen or so companies is pledging to hire, train, and promote 1 million Black workers over the course of 10 years. How did you come to be involved in this initiative?
As I worked on the digital economy and saw digital transformation, what was happening, to me it was really clear a large segment of the population would be left behind. So we had started some work, which we can talk about, on bridging this education gap, because we needed the employees too, but they couldn't get college degrees fast enough. So was there another way to hire a whole swath of people out there that could be prepared with a high school degree and maybe an associate degree? So pause there. But then as the pandemic happened, and then obviously with the killing of George Floyd and really coming back to the surface around systemic racism, Ken Chenault from American Express, Ken Frazier of Merck, as well as Charles Phillips and Kevin Shearer from Amgen came together, and we all started saying, what do we do best? As companies, what we can do is hire people. And economic opportunity is the best equalizer. That's just the beginning, because then it's the supply chains. And very simply, it's just putting supply and demand together, and all of the supply is subscale for Black employees, and we're going to help grow that.
What do you think is broken about the way companies hire, promote, and train their workers?
On one hand, you have an education system that you may have gotten a lot of debt for an education, yet you really don't have employable skills yet. So one is to work with the schools, and then on the employee side, it's really breaking down a barrier of a perception that, gee, if I bring people into my company that don't have a college degree, I'm in some form dumbing down the workforce. It's not true. I mean, now that I've been at it 8, 9, 10 years, what we've learned is that great aptitude just didn't have the same access as everyone else at the same time. These are our best employees. And by the way, as they've been around lots of other people, 75% now have college degrees, and we just had our first PhD. So the biggest thing we're going to work with all the employers on is you've got to change your job recs. It is a systemic barrier, meaning if every job you offer out there lists a whole set of college degrees required, you have completely blocked out large segments of the United States population. 60% of Americans do not have a college degree. 80% of Black Americans do not have a college degree. So you've just completely taken them off your radar screen. Now, if you would change that and say higher skills first, a different paradigm, well, then you're going to open your aperture to some great employees. And so when you say what is broke, I think it's this view that it's a degree only versus skills first, not just a degree.
Do you think that companies, and the tech industry in particular, do they value differences in race, differences in gender, differences in age as much as they should?
Well, look, the numbers don't lie about that. And so it'd be hard to answer that the system works right. But now, look, I do come from a company, I feel like I stand on the shoulders of giants on this topic, right? It was 1899, one of our predecessor companies had their first woman and first black, right? So it was 1935, equal pay, 1953, equal opportunity. So I am used to that. All that said, all of us have to do better. I mean, I'm so proud. You know, I mean, we had record diversity and inclusion numbers in my last year and this year again at IBM. And so that takes, though, not one deed. To me, it is like a million things that you have to be so consistent. And the word is authentic. You have got to authentically believe that this will make you a better company. It will make you, better innovation, better products. And, in my heart, I believe that. And I think as a company, in its DNA, it believes that.
And how much do you think it matters that the CEO, the leadership, makes this a number one priority?
I think it's imperative. It's point blank. And in fact, actually, the 110 initiative I'm working on, it is only CEOs allowed. And so, and I don't mean that in an exclusionary sense. We mean it as, if you're going to actually change paradigms, remove barriers, you've got to have someone at the top say, no, this will be important. Diversity is a number, inclusion is a choice. And you have to show people you make that choice over and over.
Absolutely. You joined IBM in 1981 when Apple was in its infancy. Facebook, Google, Amazon didn't even exist yet. You have seen so many technological shifts, whether it was the rise of the PC or smartphones or more recently the cloud, AI, quantum computing. Which of these shifts has surprised you most? Or, does anything even surprise you anymore?
I'm not sure anything surprises me anymore, but I do think more current and in this sort of last era, not a surprise, but it is absolutely the speed at which these have happened and that there's been multiple shifts at one time. Because you could say you saw cloud, you saw mobility, you see AI, data, all this at one time. And I think that's actually been what's made this digital transformation era the one that has had the most impact, and most impact on IBM. I mean, clearly when I took over, I had to refocus the company for cloud and data. And at the speed at which those were moving, and for us, that's been a journey, right? It's clearly been our most historic transformation, where we've had to divest businesses, almost over $10 billion of businesses to give you fuel, and then we did, in my time, $45 billion of R&D, and then another 65 acquisitions.
IBM reacted very quickly when the pandemic arrived in early March. How unexpected and unprecedented was that for you as a leader? Did that surprise you?
I'll have to say, at a personal level, to some degree, yes. Intellectually, no. And I'll give you this example. So here, because we're global, 170 countries, we were obviously participating with this with our Chinese workforce, our Japanese workforce. We see Italy. We're everywhere. And I am proud, by the way, every country, we were able in days, 95% of IBMers were working remotely. So I'm very proud of what that says about the infrastructure, how we do our work, our customers. That said, I can remember it was middle of March. I'd done some TV interviews, and that it was my 40th wedding anniversary. And I was going to fly to meet my husband for a weekend. And as I left, I only packed for 4 days to go down to that house to see him. And never did I really sort of realize, nope, I might not actually come back after this and stay at home, right? And so that's why so intellectually, I think we all saw it. Everyone I know, right, that I've talked to sort of has a similar story about the speed at which it then moved, that we really did need to stay in place. First thing is, okay, how do you help people, right? So, of course, your own employees. Obviously, we all worked on that first. So put that as job number one. We do own the Weather Channel. And we had a site immediately put up that you could see in your zip code, what were the cases, how many deaths, the cases growing, check on your parents, your kids, whatever it was, but one source, truthful data that was out there. We did that. The second, immediately in parallel, and this is still going now, was work on the cure. What could we do that's us, like authentically us? And it was, we sponsored for the government and put together a high-performance computing consortium, which now has 40 people who've donated their high-performance computing. We do have the top supercomputers in the world. Think of it as if you could overnight buy $1 billion computer. That's what it is that we've put together. 600 petaflops, and there's 100 world-class scientific teams that are running all of their analyses on this. So they've contributed to the cure. We took Watson and AI, 25 countries. asking questions, everything. You can remember those days, like how much misinformation was out there about COVID. And so all that got underway. Then we had to quickly move to another phase. Not quickly, it was months, but how do you return to work safely?
Other CEOs have used the words terror and fear and felt like we got hit by a torpedo. Was there any amount of fear for you as a leader, as somebody who's in charge of these tens of thousands of people?
350,000. And, no, those are not words in my vocabulary, basically. And I think because we do mission critical work, I've always felt that when things got the most tense, I'd become the most calm. And it is in those moments that people look to you to steer them through something. So it is a determined calm is how I would describe it.
Where does that come from in you?
I guess I've often thought about that, and I think it comes from my early time. I've talked with you, I think, before about my mother, and single mom, found herself raising 4 children suddenly. She didn't have an education. We spent time on food stamps. My mother was determined not to let that be the end of the story. Found her way out with an education out of that. The rest of us all turned out well by watching her. And in that moment, it taught us, never let something define you. Only you define who you are. So you take control of that. And I think that is what has stayed with me through all this time. And whether it's a crisis or whether it is actually the reinvention of a company or myself, the idea that only you define who you are, not someone else.
You've said you've never thought about yourself as being a woman CEO, but that is how others have often thought of you. Did you find that frustrating over the years?
I've said to other women as they've taken on their CEO roles, I said, get ready, because everything you do is magnified. Everything you do is personalized. I can't tell you that that's fair, but it's what happens.
You've seen so much innovation, so much evolution in your time at IBM. How do you think IBM is a different company today than when you took over as CEO?
We now have our next enduring technology platform. That's what the team has built. Hybrid cloud and AI. IBM does its best when it has a physical technology platform. So things like the mainframe was there for decades, still will be there for decades. Modernized, it's on Z15, 16. And to me, hybrid cloud AI is this company's next platform. And because there is a very serious set of work we do that requires the ability to run work wherever you need to run it, whether it's a private cloud, multiple public clouds, build something once, run it anywhere, get a scale advantage from that, not be locked in, get open innovation. This was all behind our open hybrid cloud.
I would love it if you would humor us and go back a bit more in time and paint the picture for us of a young Ginny Rometty walking through the doors of IBM as a systems engineer in Detroit in 1981?
I came from a single mom who, to get us off of food stamps, found her way back to get an associate degree so she could get a job so we could all go to school. So I start there. I'd had a scholarship from General Motors, bless them, through Northwestern University. So I first did work there. So before that, then I went to IBM. So I worked there a year, but as I've told Mary Barra, I love what she does and she is passionate about cars. I wanted to apply technology to a lot of things. So went to IBM, and here's what I'll remember of that first day. Of course, I did not have a blue suit, all right? Had not had one. I'm not sure I had any suits, actually. But this is back in time, right? So this is 1981. I had a blue suit. I can remember coming home from work, taking my jacket off, putting it on the couch, and my husband saying, "Do you realize the price tags are still on your suit?" And that's how I remember my first day, and I thought, how gracious. There wasn't a single person who said anything about that.
Your mom, how influential was she over the years?
She showed us that nobody defines your future, you do it. And we watched that and learned that by just looking at what she did.
I remember when you took this job in 2011, the New York Times wrote this big piece about your husband and how he was your support system, and as all husbands should be. And it had a big impact on me because I think we often think our support systems should be invisible, but then we don't learn how other people do it. And I'd love to know more about how that partnership evolved over the years, especially as you were CEO.
I just had my 40th wedding anniversary, and so 40 years. And you know what I say about Mark, he's my biggest fan. And that, I think that makes all the difference in the world. And so that it's a partnership. And I know not everyone has been blessed like I have to have that kind of relationship where not only, I say when you become CEO, it's a family job. It isn't as if it's just one person. So it's impact on time. My whole life, I traveled for my position as an example. And we always had a rule that never be more than 2 weeks apart from each other. And we never broke that rule. And 40 years of my traveling. And so those are the kinds of things that I think, they keep you together, build it stronger. And I have been really blessed and lucky to have someone like that by my side who took as much pride and was tried to learn as much about IBM and be its ambassador, right? I feel he was IBM's ambassador and took as much interest in my clients as I did. So it was a real partnership. And clearly I did nothing else but work. So I have such great empathy for women that, have children and all these other responsibilities. I worked and Mark really did take care of everything else while I did work. So I was lucky from that sense.
Well, I'm sure you're selling yourself a little bit short, and he is very lucky to have you as well. I will just say that. You've said you've never thought about yourself as being a woman CEO, but that is how others have often thought of you. Did you find that frustrating over the years or unfair in any way?
So that's an interesting question from two perspectives, because I've often felt when I first became CEO, I really did not want to be labeled that. I wanted to be recognized for what I could accomplish. I think many women feel that way. I think many people feel that way. But I will tell you a different side of that story, that as time went on, I did begin to realize this obligation to be a role model. And you could see so many people that would react to not just what I did or what I said, but that it was you were a role model for their children, their daughter, someone, themselves. And this idea that you cannot be what you cannot see. I began to internalize that and did feel it was an obligation. And I've changed my view about that. And as my tenure went on, you saw me become, more vocal about that and more involved in things, because I realized, and whether it's a woman or any group, people have got to have role models to see what's possible. And that is, in a positive way, an obligation there. Now, with it becomes, I've said to other women as they've taken on their CEO roles, I said, get ready, because everything you do is magnified, everything you do is personalized. I can't tell you that that's fair, but it's what happens. And so just power through and do what it is you think must be done.
So what is your advice to young women out there who want to be you, who want to be leaders?
It's probably the one piece of advice I am best known for, Emily, around the world. And it is my husband that taught me the lesson. It was early in my career. I had interviewed for a job, was offered it, and I was very nervous about taking it. I didn't think I was ready. I thought I needed a few more years. And Mark had said to me when I came home, he said, because I told the person, let me think about this. And I'd come home and Mark said to me, Jenny, do you think a man would have answered the question that way? And in those moments, what I remember is that growth and comfort will never coexist. And so everyone I talk to, I say, look, you just get really comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that when you're uncomfortable, that means you're learning and growing. And so to your earlier question about fear, I view those moments as like wonderful learning opportunities. And that's my biggest advice.
So have you replayed that story to yourself over the years as you've had moments where you're saying,
100 times.
A man would not do this?
Well, what I've replayed to myself more is go put yourself at risk. Don't worry. If you're nervous about something, fantastic. Or if you're not nervous, equally a concern. Be sure you take on something different and go learn something new.
IBM's shares declined during your tenure as CEO. And I wonder, is there something you think investors just didn't get?
Obviously, you would want your share price to grow. So, of course, to that.
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
China continues to be, recovering well. And with the opening up that was decided at the last 5-year plan, that is a golden opportunity for many international banks.
So we'll look to double our footprint across IB and also wealth management and asset management in the 3 to 5 year time frame.
Growth outlook structurally is very strong, but it does need to consolidate and allow time to help the share price appreciation to move more in sync with the growth.
So China can avoid further decoupling if they stop these inappropriate actions.
But at the moment, we really want to see the dust settle first on international relationships, on China's role in the global economy.
I don't see a likelihood of a big change in the policy with the change of administrations.
IBM's shares declined during your tenure as CEO, and I wonder if that was frustrating to watch. I know CEOs always tell us they don't pay attention to the share price, but it has to be distracting. And I wonder, is there something you think investors just didn't get?
Well, look, we did return $43 billion to shareholders during my time frame with dividend, and actually the dividend grew by 100%. But clearly, obviously, you would want your share price to grow. So, of course, to that. And I think the piece in what we had to undertake was the hard work to reinvent IBM for the long term. And that's what we went about and did. We had a tall order to address. We did it. And so I'm really looking forward to now this next chapter for the company.
IBM is hanging a lot of its future on hybrid. How will the company, and how should the company, differentiate itself from rivals in hybrid like Microsoft?
Okay, well, we're clearly the one that defined hybrid, and we are clearly the one, I would say the others have joined us now in this conversation. And so how we're clearly distinguished, we are the only one with an open hybrid cloud. So think of it real simple for a client. This means if it's open technologies, open source, open technologies, you can get access to innovation anywhere. Oh, so A, I get more innovation. B, I can write something once and it can run anywhere. It can run on another cloud as long as you have that hybrid open layer there. And that means it could run on any number of public clouds. It could run on your own cloud. It can run on your private cloud, your on-premise. Okay, perfect. So when a pandemic hits and I worry about where things are operating and need to move them, I am fit for purpose ready. And then once I do that, there's a skills battle out there. Well, all better that I can only have one set of skills no matter what I do. And then, of course, you would guess it's 2.5 times less operating costs. So we are the only, short answer, we are the true open hybrid cloud.
The tech industry more broadly is under fire for stifling innovation. Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook. Having seen so many generations of technology, do you believe we're in a different phase? Do you believe these companies are stifling innovation? Do you believe that legislation or a breakup is in order?
Yeah, I don't think it's that simple of a question, and I don't know about stifle innovation because I take it back a few layers from that. I can remember early on defining, we don't believe we own a customer's data, they do. We will only use it with their permission. Data belongs to the creator. We, in fact, even the algorithms, the AI that comes and derives out of it, it belongs to them. So you make your choices, and then you hold yourself to be audited against them. I think this is more about companies being clear what they believe and then standing up to those things.
That said, your competition and IBM's competition is formidable. What do you think are the biggest challenges that your successor, Arvind Krishna, will have to deal with?
Well, look, I have extreme confidence in Arvind. He is exactly the man. He's a brilliant technologist, architect, sees exactly what this means to be an open hybrid cloud. And so now Arvind's transition will be as we first spin off the managed infrastructure business and then reposition IBM into growth. I mean, we're positioned, and now, as he said to everyone, this is about a growth mindset and a culture of radical candor, and because he now takes it to that step of growth.
When you look back, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I don't think about life that way, right? Because I always believe in that moment, you make the very best decisions you can with everything that's happened then.
IBM has a hand in so many futuristic technologies, whether it is quantum computing or AI. It's often so hard to imagine how these technologies are going to actually change our lives in concrete ways. And given what you've seen over the last 40 years, I'm wondering if you would take us 40 years ahead. How will our lives be different in 2060 because of technology?
Well, first off, there'll be lots of technologies you won't even know yet. They have not yet been invented. So I will tell you that, right? So on one hand, you should expect a lot of things you didn't know today. But I do believe that we're going to solve some really tough problems for humanity over these next decades. Look, AI is in its really early stages still of deployment. And so you've yet to see the real benefits of AI to come in front of us. And in that time frame, quantum will be flourishing. And so, quantum, the great sides of quantum are things like drug discovery, materials discovery that will be out there, the speed of how it's done. And so you will see, technologies you never saw before. You'll actually see AI used to reinvent businesses, and you'll see quantum come into real commercialization in that time frame.
All right. Ginny Rometty, outgoing IBM Executive Chair and former CEO. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Studio 1.0.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary